Welcome back, dear friend. Tonight, we're stepping into the world of sea raiders, explorers, traders, and storytellers. The Vikings. These fierce yet fascinating people left their mark on Europe and beyond, shaping cultures, battles, and legends that echo to this day. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy the type of content that merges myth and mystery. And hey, let us know from where you are watching. What time is it for you right now? Sometimes our stories are better than sleep, and other times they make you dream louder. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight together. Close your eyes, dear friend, and let us drift backward in time. The world we know today, its cities, its borders, its comforts, did not exist when the first Vikings began their story. Imagine instead a landscape carved by ice, rugged and raw, the northern lands of Scandinavia, where the Viking Age was born, were places of long winters, wild forests, and waters that seemed endless. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, these were the homelands of the people who would one day sail farther than most dared to dream. Life here was not simple. The soil was thin, and the cold seasons pressed hard upon the people. To survive, one had to be resourceful, fishing, hunting, and farming. Small plots of land were not just occupations, but necessities. Families lived in scattered settlements, each household working together to endure the dark months and to celebrate the light of summer. Yet it was this very environment, harsh, demanding, and at times unforgiving, that shaped the Vikings into who they would become. Strength, resilience, and adaptability were not just admired traits, they were the keys to life itself. But before they became known to the world as raiders and explorers, they were simply Norse folk, bound by kinship and tradition. The people of Scandinavia had been living in these northern lands for centuries, long before the great ships took to the seas. They were farmers who grew barley and rye, herders who kept cattle, sheep, and pigs, and hunters who tracked elk and reindeer through the forests. They built homes from timber and stone, long houses where extended families gathered beneath a single roof. The smoke of their fires curled through open rafters, warming both people and animals, who sometimes shared the same shelter during the coldest nights. Yet survival was not enough to explain the restless energy that stirred within them. The Norse had always been a seafaring people, surrounded by fjords, rivers, and coasts. Water was as natural to them as land. The sea offered food in the form of fish and whales, but it also offered something greater, a path outward, a road to the unknown. From childhood, boys and girls grew up with the rhythms of the ocean, the crash of waves, the creak of oars, the whisper of sails in the wind. It is here, in the late 8th century, that we begin to see the first stirrings of what history calls the Viking Age. But the truth is more mysterious. There was no sudden announcement, no grand moment, when someone declared that the age of the Vikings had begun. Instead, it unfolded gradually as these northern people expanded their horizons. Perhaps it began with small journeys across the sea to trade with neighbors. Perhaps it was the need for resources, or perhaps it was simple curiosity. What lay beyond the next horizon? There is another layer to this story, one that reaches into the soul of the Norse people, their mythology. They lived in a world where the natural and the supernatural intertwined. Storms at sea were not just weather, but the wrath of Thor. A raven circling overhead was not just a bird, but a messenger of Odin, the All-Father. Life was guided by a deep sense of fate, what they called wyrd. To be born in those northern lands was to believe that your life was part of a greater saga, a story written by the Norns, the weavers of destiny. And when you see your life as a tale to be told, perhaps the urge to seek adventure, to win glory, and to carve your name into memory becomes irresistible. The beginnings of the Viking Age are often marked by a single year, 793 AD. That was when a band of Norse raiders stormed the monastery of Lindisfarne on the coast of England. To Christian monks, it was an act of shocking brutality. To later historians, it was the spark that lit the fire of Viking expansion. But the roots of that raid, the forces that pushed those men across the sea, were laid long before. Population pressures at home, the search for fertile land, the desire for silver and wealth, the hunger for renown. All these currents swirled together, and so, with sturdy ships beneath them and belief in their gods above them, the Vikings began to move outward. Their world was both isolated and connected. Isolated because the mountains and seas made travel across Scandinavia difficult, keeping communities small and scattered. Connected because those same seas opened paths to the wider world. They traded furs and amber with continental Europe. They knew of the Frankish kingdoms to the south and the rich, glittering empire of Byzantium to the far east. They may even have heard whispers of lands across the great western ocean, though those whispers would not become reality until later generations. If you could stand on a high cliff in Norway at the dawn of the Viking Age, you would see narrow valleys stretching toward the horizon, fjords cutting into the land like deep blue veins, and small farms clinging to patches of soil where crops could grow. You would see men and women working side by side, children running through the grass, elders sharing stories by the fire. You would hear the songs of the skalds, poets who kept memory alive with tales of gods, heroes, and ancestors. And you might sense, in the air, the restless spirit that would soon carry these people far beyond the lands of their birth. The mysterious beginnings of the Vikings remind us that history is never a single event. It is a tide, rising slowly, shaping the world bit by bit. The Vikings did not know they were at the dawn of an age. To them, they were simply living, surviving, seeking fortune and honor as their fathers had done. Yet in their ships, in their beliefs, and in their unyielding will, the seeds of legend were already planted. And so, dear friend, as we lay the first stone in our long journey tonight, imagine yourself among them, standing in the chill air of a northern morning, gazing out at the endless sea. You hear the gulls calling, you feel the salt on your lips, and you know that beyond that horizon lies adventure, danger, and destiny. This was the world from which the Vikings came. This was the mysterious beginning of their story. Now that we've set sail into the northern landscapes where the Viking Age was born, it is time to pause and consider the very word we use so casually today, Viking. It rolls easily off the tongue, conjuring images of fierce warriors, horned helmets, though we know those are myths, and longships cutting through the waves. But in truth, the word itself is more elusive, more layered, and its meaning has shifted. Over time, if you were to travel back into the 9th or 10th century, walking into a Norse settlement, and you asked a man or woman, "Are you a Viking?" they might look at you with confusion. That was not how they described themselves. They were Norsemen, or Danes, or Swedes, or simply members of their families and clans. Their identity was rooted in land, kinship, and honor, not in this single label. So where does the word come from? Linguists and historians trace it back to Old Norse, the language spoken across Scandinavia. The word Vikinger referred to a person, while Viking described the activity they pursued. At its heart, it meant something close to go on an expedition, especially by sea. Some suggest that it connects to Vik, meaning a bay or an inlet, places where ships could lie in wait before launching an attack. Thus, a Viking was not simply a farmer or a craftsman, but someone who chose, at least for a season, to leave home and set out across the waters to raid, to trade, or to explore. In this sense, being a Viking was not so much an identity as it was a role, a calling, perhaps temporary, sometimes lasting years, sometimes just for a single summer. One year, a man might till his fields, tend his cattle, and share mead with his kin. The next, he might be rowing at sea, his eyes fixed on distant shores. Some men and women spent much of their lives at home. Others became wanderers, and some stories tell of those who never returned, swallowed by the ocean or slain in foreign lands. There is poetry hidden in this word. To go a Viking was to step into uncertainty, to take up a life of risk and reward. It meant daring to face the open sea with all its dangers, and daring also to face the wrath of those who lived beyond it. It carried with it the possibility of wealth, silver coins, fine cloth, spices, and treasures taken from monasteries or traded in distant markets. But it also carried with it the promise of renown. For in Norse culture, wealth faded, but reputation endured. To be remembered in sagas and songs was the true measure of a life well lived. Yet we must be careful not to let the later myths cloud the meaning of this word. For centuries after the Viking Age ended, their reputation was painted largely by those who suffered under their raids. In England, in France, in Ireland, chroniclers wrote of them as heathen scourges, bringers of fire and destruction. The word Viking became synonymous with terror. To pray, "Deliver us, O Lord, from the fury of the Northmen," was a common plea in monasteries that had been burned and looted. But this is only part of the truth. For if we listen more closely, the word Viking does not only belong to raiders, it belongs equally to the traders who sailed calmly into markets in the Baltic and Black Seas, exchanging goods instead of weapons. It belongs to the explorers who braved the North Atlantic to find new lands. It even belongs to those who took service as mercenaries in far-off courts, like the Varangian Guard in Constantinople. The word contains multitudes: adventure, danger, commerce, and ambition. It is fascinating, too, to see how outsiders used the word. In Anglo-Saxon chronicles, the Vikings were those who arrived in ships, plundering the coasts. In Irish annals, they were foreigners, sometimes differentiated between fair-haired and dark-haired groups, depending on their homelands. In the East, among the Slavs and Byzantines, the Norse were often called Varangians or Russ, words that spoke more to their role as traders and settlers than raiders. The Vikings were never just one thing. They were what they needed to be in each moment, shaped by opportunity and circumstance. There is another layer of mystery in the word's origin. Some scholars suggest that vik, that simple bay or inlet, might not only describe geography, but also the strategy of those who used it. A Viking ship could wait in a hidden bay, concealed from sight, until the right moment came to strike. The word itself may have carried with it the whisper of stealth, of sudden emergence from the unknown. Imagine the terror of a monk at dawn, seeing longships appear on the horizon, as if conjured from mist. Perhaps to them, the very word Viking meant unpredictability, a force that could arrive at any time from the endless sea. But for the Norse themselves, to go a Viking was not necessarily shameful. It was a way to gain riches, yes, but also to test oneself, to prove courage, to fulfill fate. A father might send his son to sea, not with reluctance, but with pride, hoping that he would return with both wealth and honor. The sagas speak often of voyages, of men who left home with little and came back celebrated, yet they also remind us of the sorrow of those who never returned, leaving behind wives, children, and parents to mourn and remember. As time passed, the meaning of Viking evolved. By the 19th century, when scholars and artists rediscovered the sagas, the word became romanticized. No longer just raiders, the Vikings were celebrated as explorers, as noble savages, as symbols of adventure. The horned helmets appeared then too, an invention of costume designers, not of history. And today, the word Viking carries with it both truth and myth, history and imagination. So when we speak of Vikings tonight, dear friend, remember this. The word does not capture the whole of who they were. It captures a moment, an activity, a way of life chosen by some among the Norse. It is both broader and narrower than we often think. Broader because it includes raiders, traders, explorers, and settlers. Narrower because not every Scandinavian man or woman was a Viking. To call them all Vikings is like calling every sailor a pirate or every traveler an adventurer. And yet, perhaps this very ambiguity is what makes the word so enchanting. It allows us to imagine the sea spray, the clash of weapons, the shimmer of silver coins, the glow of hearth fires, and the whisper of sagas carried from one generation to the next. The word Viking is not a single definition. It is a doorway, a key to a world of movement, daring, and dreams. So, as you rest tonight, think of that word not as a fixed title, but as a call to adventure. To go a Viking was to leave behind the safe and the known, to embrace uncertainty, and to carve your story upon the waters of the world. And that, in the end, is the truest meaning of Viking. Now that we understand the beginnings of the Viking Age and what it truly meant to go a Viking, let us turn our gaze inward to the homes, the hearts, and the daily rhythms of the Norse people. For the Vikings were more than raiders or explorers. They were humans, living, laughing, working, and dreaming in a world both beautiful and harsh. Picture, if you will, a longhouse resting in a narrow valley, surrounded by forests and hills, perhaps near the edge of a fjord. Smoke drifts lazily from the roof, curling into the crisp, northern air, and inside, life hums in gentle, purposeful motion. The longhouse was the center of Norse life, a communal place where extended families lived under one roof, sometimes numbering dozens of people. Its walls were made of timber, stone, or turf, depending on what the land offered, and the roof was steep to let the snow slide off in winter. A central hearth burned day and night, a source of warmth, light, and sustenance. Around this hearth, life unfolded in rhythms shaped by the seasons. In winter, when the sun barely rose above the horizon, families gathered close to share stories, mend tools, weave cloth, and prepare meals. In summer, the longhouse spilled outward, with people tending to crops, pastures, and gardens. Barley, rye, and oats grew in fields carefully plowed, while vegetables like beans, peas, and cabbage were nurtured in smaller plots. Livestock, cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs provided milk, meat, and wool, sustaining families. Through the harsh months, children helped with chores, learning the ways of the land and the sea, while elders told tales of gods and ancestors, teaching lessons in courage, honor, and wit. That hierarchy in Norse society was subtle, yet firm. At the top stood the jarls, the noblemen who held land and influence. Below them were the carls, free farmers, and craftsmen who formed the backbone of the community. At the bottom were thralls, or slaves, often prisoners from raids, whose labor was essential to the wealth and survival of the household. Yet even among these ranks, relationships mattered more than wealth alone. Honor, reputation, and loyalty defined social standing, sometimes more than gold or silver. Trade and craftsmanship were integral to daily life. The Norse were skilled woodworkers, blacksmiths, and weavers. They carved intricate designs into household objects, tools, and weapons, blending utility with artistry. Jewelry, often made of bronze, silver, or gold, reflected both status and taste. Tools were not only functional, but imbued with care, demonstrating a respect for work and skill that ran through every aspect of life. Food was both simple and vital. Stews simmered over the hearth, combining grains, vegetables, and occasionally meat or fish. Dairy products, cheese, milk, butter, were staples, as were preserved foods, smoked or salted, to last through the long winter. Ale and mead flowed at feasts, small celebrations of life, honor, or the return of a loved one from a distant journey. Meals were communal, binding the family together, a daily ritual of connection and survival. Yet Norse life was not merely practical, it was deeply interwoven with meaning and ritual. Births, weddings, and deaths were marked with ceremonies, often calling upon gods for blessing or protection. Funerals could be elaborate, sometimes involving ship burials or cremations, where the deceased was sent off with their possessions, weapons, and sometimes animals, believed to accompany them into the next world. Life and death were not separated, but part of a continuous saga, remembered in stories and sagas that would echo long after bones had returned to the earth. The rhythms of nature dictated much of the Norse day-to-day existence. Dawn might find families tending fields or heading out to fish in fjords or rivers. Midday, they might take respite, repairing tools, teaching children, or sharing tales of old heroes. Evening brought the warmth of the hearth, the flicker of firelight, and the gentle murmur of voices recounting deeds of gods, ancestors, or even the faint rumors of distant lands beyond the horizon. It was a world both constrained and open, harsh yet full of wonder. Community mattered immensely. Villages and settlements were interdependent. Neighbors helped one another with harvests, construction, and defense. Disputes, while inevitable, were often settled through assemblies called things, gatherings where justice was spoken aloud and decisions were made collectively. The strength of a family or a community was measured not just in wealth or weapons, but in honor, loyalty, and the ability to survive together through storm and winter. And yet, for all the hard work and practical concerns, the Norse also had time for beauty and leisure. Music, poetry, and storytelling were woven into life. Skalds, the poets, carried history, law, and myth in their memory, reciting long tales of gods, heroes, and epic journeys. Games were played, songs sung, and dances performed, especially during feasts and celebrations. Life was demanding, yes, but it was also rich with joy, camaraderie, and imagination. Even children, though often helping with chores, were nurtured with lessons in courage, wisdom, and cleverness. They heard the stories of Odin's quests for knowledge, of Thor's mighty hammer, of Loki's clever tricks. They learned that strength alone was not enough. Intelligence, cunning, and courage were equally valued, and in this gentle transmission of culture, the seeds of the Viking spirit were planted, seeds that would one day sprout in voyages across oceans, in trade across distant lands, and in the tales that still captivate us today. So, as we drift a little further into the world of the Vikings tonight, imagine yourself in one of those longhouses. Feel the warmth of the hearth, smell the tang of smoke, and the aroma of simmering stew. Hear the quiet, conversations, the laughter of children, the clatter of tools being repaired. Sense the presence of family, of community, of a people connected to the land and sea in ways both practical and sacred. This was the daily life that shaped the Viking spirit, giving them the strength, resilience, and curiosity that would eventually carry them far beyond their northern homes. And with that vision in your mind, let your thoughts settle gently on the rhythm of Norse life, the ebb and flow of work and rest, the harmony of family and community, the whisper of stories and songs. In understanding their everyday existence, we begin to understand the foundation upon which the legends of the Vikings were built. Now that we've settled into the daily life of the Norse, it is time to turn our attention to their beliefs, the unseen world that colored their every thought, decision, and action. To the Vikings, the world was alive with gods, spirits, and forces of nature, and understanding these was as vital as knowing how to plow a field or repair a ship. Picture a northern landscape, mist curling around forests and fjords. The wind whispers through the trees, and the waves crash against rocky shores. To the Norse, these were not just elements of the physical world. They were the voices and movements of powerful beings. At the center of their spiritual life were the gods of Asgard, a realm high above the mortal world, where the mighty Odin, the wise Allfather, presided. Odin was the seeker of knowledge, the god who sacrificed much for wisdom, even giving one of his eyes to drink from the well of Mimir. To call upon Odin was to seek guidance, courage, and insight, especially in the uncertain and often dangerous life of a Viking. Alongside Odin stood Thor, the hammer-wielding god of thunder, protector of both gods and humans. Thunderstorms were not mere weather. They were Thor's voice, a reminder of strength and protection. Farmers, warriors, and travelers alike called upon Thor for courage and safety. His hammer, a symbol painted on amulets, shields, and even the doors of homes. And then there was Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and magic, whose influence touched both the domestic and the mystical. She was sought in matters of hearth and home, as well as in divination, love, and battle. The Norse pantheon was vast, filled with gods, goddesses, giants, and spirits, each with their own stories, powers, and personalities. They were not distant beings, they were intimately involved in the lives of mortals, their stories intertwined with the everyday. The Norse understood the world as a complex weave of fate and free will, courage and cunning, strength and intelligence. Life was dangerous and unpredictable, and so the guidance of these gods was essential. Ritual and ceremony were woven into Norse life. Offerings were made to the gods, sometimes food, sometimes drink, sometimes small treasures. Sacrifices could be simple or elaborate, depending on the importance of the occasion. In some cases, animals were offered to honor the gods, and their well-being, or the way they fell, was seen as a sign of divine favor. Festivals marked the turning of the seasons, the sowing of crops, the harvest, and the solstices. These were times of celebration, community, and reverence, when families and neighbors gathered to honor both the land and the gods who watched over it. But the Norse did not only worship in grand ceremonies, their spirituality infused everyday life. Before a journey, a farmer would ask Thor for protection. A warrior might whisper a prayer to Odin before battle. The world itself was alive with magic and meaning. Spirits were believed to inhabit rivers, forests, rocks, and trees. Fate, or word, was ever present, a thread running through every action, connecting past, present, and future. To understand fate was to understand one's place in the world, and to live wisely was to act in accordance with it. Stories, of course, were central to this belief system. The sagas, told aloud by skalds or passed down in whispers around the hearth, preserved the deeds of gods and heroes, the lessons of courage, cleverness, and endurance. They taught that bravery, honor, and cleverness mattered as much as strength, that misfortune and missteps were part of life, and that every choice had consequences woven into the larger tapestry of destiny. Through these stories, gods were not distant or abstract. They were companions in understanding the world, mentors in moral and practical guidance, and reminders of the mysteries that lay beyond mortal eyes. Death, too, was framed by religion and myth. The Norse believed in multiple realms for the afterlife. Warriors who died bravely in battle could be taken to Valhalla, the great hall of Odin, where they would feast and train for the final battle at the end of the world, Ragnarok. Others might go to Hell, a cold but not necessarily frightening place, ruled by the goddess of the same name, where life continued in another form. Funerals were significant events, sometimes involving ship burials, where the deceased was laid to rest with possessions, weapons, and even animals, sent off on a symbolic journey to the next life. These rituals honored the gods, preserved social bonds, and reminded the living of their place in the world. Even as raiders and traders, the Vikings' actions were intertwined with religion. Victories at sea, successful raids, bountiful harvests, all were interpreted as signs of divine favor. Failures and misfortunes were examined for lessons, warnings, or omens. Every ship that left port, every village that set out to trade or explore, carried with it prayers, rituals, and offerings designed to secure protection and guidance. The spiritual life of the Vikings was inseparable from their practical lives. It was a constant hum beneath every action, a rhythm as natural as the tides themselves. Perhaps most captivating of all was the Norse sense of wonder at the universe. They imagined a cosmos filled with worlds: Midgard, the human realm; Asgard, the home of the gods; Jotunheim, land of giants; and others, each connected by the world tree, Yggdrasil. The sky, the seas, and the earth were alive with stories, spirits, and meaning. The world was not empty. It was full of mystery, danger, and opportunity. To the Vikings, living was an act of navigation through the physical landscape and through the moral and spiritual one as well. So, dear friend, as you listen tonight and imagine this world, picture the Norse in their daily rituals, standing beneath tall trees, or gazing at storm-tossed seas, or gathering around hearth fires. Hear the whispered prayers to Thor before a voyage, the chant of blessings for a newborn child, the solemn words at a funeral. Feel the presence of gods in every gesture, every sigh, every thought. This was a world alive with meaning, full of stories, and deeply intertwined with the lives of the people who would one day sail beyond their fjords and rivers to leave a mark upon the world. And as your eyelids grow heavy, let your imagination drift along the paths of their beliefs, through misty forests, over choppy seas, and into halls where gods and mortals meet. In understanding the Norse religion and the pantheon of gods, we begin to see the heart of the Viking spirit: brave, curious, and forever reaching for something beyond the horizon, yet always tethered to the rhythms, rituals, and stories of home. Now, dear friend, let us turn our attention to one of the most remarkable achievements of the Viking world: their ships. For without these vessels, the tales of distant raids, faraway explorations, and legendary journeys would not exist. The Vikings were not only warriors and traders, they were master shipbuilders, shaping wood and iron into creations that could defy wind, waves, and the unknown. Imagine the coastline of Norway, Sweden, or Denmark, where tall cliffs meet fjords and rivers twist inland. The sound of water lapping against rocky shores is accompanied by the rhythm of hammers and saws, the scrape of axes, and the soft whisper of craftsmen examining planks of oak and pine. Shipbuilding was a sacred craft passed down through generations, and it demanded patience, skill, and an intimate understanding of nature. The longship, the iconic symbol of the Viking Age, was a marvel of design. Sleek, narrow, and long, it could glide across both open seas and shallow rivers. Its shallow draft allowed it to slip close to shores, to sail up rivers into the heart of foreign lands, or to retreat quickly when danger threatened. The symmetry of its hull, the careful placement of planks, and the precise balance of mast and sail reflected centuries of accumulated knowledge. Each ship was unique, built to the specific needs of its captain and crew, and yet all followed the same principles: speed, maneuverability, and resilience. To construct a ship, the Vikings selected the finest trees, often oak or pine, harvested with reverence. They worked with tools of iron and wood, shaping each plank with care, bending them with steam, and fastening them with iron rivets or wooden pegs. The hull was layered in a technique called clinker building, where planks overlapped to create strength and flexibility, allowing the vessel to bend with the waves rather than resist them. From bow to stern, the ship seemed to float not just on water, but almost above it, ready to carry its crew to adventure. The mast and sail were as important as the hull. A single square sail, often dyed and patterned with stripes or symbols, could harness the wind to speed a journey across hundreds of miles of open ocean. When there was no wind, oars lined the sides of the ship, strong enough to propel it upriver or along the coast. Rowers worked in rhythm, muscles straining, breath steady, while the captain guided them with a firm voice. Life aboard these ships required discipline, endurance, and trust. Each person's actions mattered in keeping the vessel balanced, moving, and safe. Viking ships were more than tools. They were extensions of their culture, a reflection of their relationship with the sea. Each voyage was a test of skill, courage, and faith. The ocean was both provider and adversary. It brought fish and trade, but it also carried storms and peril. To the Norse, a well-built ship was protection, freedom, and possibility all in one. Its timbers sang with the stories of those who had traveled before, its prow cutting through waves like the spear of a hero in a saga. These ships enabled Vikings to reach lands far beyond Scandinavia. They could sail across the North Sea to the British Isles, down the rivers of France, into the heart of Russia, and across the Atlantic to Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Without such vessels, the legendary journeys of Leif Erikson and others would have been impossible. Without them, the raids on Lindisfarne, the trading posts in Byzantium, and the settlements in Normandy would have remained mere dreams. Shipbuilding was also a community endeavor. It was not done in solitude, but with the cooperation of skilled craftsmen, apprentices, and laborers. Villages and settlements often gathered to assist in the construction of larger vessels, for a ship could not be built alone. This process strengthened community bonds, taught younger generations the value of craft and patience, and preserved techniques that would carry the Viking spirit across generations. The artistry of Viking ships extended beyond function. Prows were often carved with intricate designs, dragons, serpents, or abstract patterns, believed to protect the crew or intimidate enemies. Some ships were painted, their colors bright against the gray sea, announcing presence and power. Even burial ships, carried to their final resting places, reflected this blend of craftsmanship, artistry, and spiritual belief, showing that the ship was more than transportation. It was a vessel of identity, honor, and journey, both in life and beyond. Imagine now lying on the deck of a longship as it cuts through a misty fjord. The rhythmic splash of oars blends with the whisper of the wind in the sail. The smell of pine and salt water fills your senses. You feel the sway of the vessel beneath your feet, the strength of your companions rowing in unison, and the pulse of adventure that carries you forward. This is not just a journey across water. It is a voyage into history, into the life and soul of the Vikings themselves. The mastery of shipbuilding gave the Vikings something few cultures possessed: the ability to act on ambition. With ships they could raid, trade, explore, and settle. They could respond to opportunities or threats with speed and decisiveness. They could connect distant lands, carry their culture, language, and influence across oceans and rivers, and return home with tales, treasures, and experience. In short, the longship was the backbone of Viking society, a symbol of ingenuity, courage, and the human desire to reach beyond what is known. And so, dear friend, as you imagine these ships gliding over calm seas, let your mind drift with the rhythm of oars and the flutter of sails. Hear the gentle creak of wood, smell the tang of salt water, and feel the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that humans, even in the harshest climates, can create something extraordinary. The Viking ship is more than a vessel. It is a testament to skill, ambition, and the spirit of exploration, carrying its people across both water and time, leaving ripples that echo into the present. Now that we have sailed along the craftsmanship of Viking ships, let us glide into the moment when these vessels carried their crews beyond familiar waters toward the world that awaited them, with both opportunity and danger. Imagine the North Sea, vast and silver beneath the early morning sun, the chill of the wind brushing your face, and the rhythmic splash of oars as a longship moves quietly toward distant shores. It is here that the Vikings, for the first time, entered the pages of European history, not as farmers or craftsmen, but as raiders. The year is 793 AD, a year that would be remembered across centuries. On a small island off the northeast coast of England, a monastery stands, its white walls glistening in the morning light. Inside, monks live in quiet devotion, tending sacred texts, singing chants, and praying for guidance and protection. For generations, they have known peace, but across the cold waters, a fleet of longships approaches, sleek and silent. The Vikings have come. The attack on Lindisfarne is often marked as the beginning of the Viking Age. Yet it was not a single event in isolation. It was the culmination of decades of preparation, knowledge, and daring. The Vikings had honed their skills at sea, learned the ways of currents and tides, and observed the lands beyond their fjords. They understood opportunity, timing, and the element of surprise. And so they struck. The monastery was looted, treasures were taken, walls were broken, and the monks were terrorized. To the Christian world, it was an act of unthinkable violence. To the Vikings, it was a calculated endeavor, a step into a larger world of possibilities. These first raids were not merely about plunder. They were lessons, shaping the tactics, strategies, and ambitions of the Norse. Vikings learned which coasts were vulnerable, which towns were wealthy, and how to navigate both rivers and seas to strike swiftly and retreat before local forces could respond. Early raids often targeted monasteries because they were isolated, wealthy, and lightly defended. Silver, gold, fine cloth, and precious manuscripts could be taken with minimal risk. enriching both individuals and communities back home. Imagine the preparations for such a voyage. Ships are repaired, oars checked for cracks, sails mended, weapons are sharpened, axes, spears, and swords polished to gleaming edges. Men gather in the longhouses of the coast, their expressions calm yet determined, hearts beating with a mixture of anticipation and respect for what lies ahead. Elders may offer prayers to Thor for strength, Odin for wisdom, and Freya for protection. Every detail matters, for success means both survival and honor, while failure could be fatal. When the first raiders set foot on foreign soil, they entered a world both strange and vulnerable. Languages were different, customs unfamiliar, and defenses minimal. Yet these moments of crossing boundaries, the leap from home into the unknown, were thrilling, shaping the character of Viking society. Courage was measured not only by skill in battle, but also by willingness to venture into uncertainty. Each raid became a story, retold around hearths and longhouses, building the legends that would one day grow into the sagas. The raids that followed Lindisfarne spread across the British Isles. Vikings struck along the coasts of Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex, each journey teaching new lessons about timing, navigation, and strategy. Sometimes, raiders returned home laden with treasures. Sometimes they brought back captives to serve as laborers, and sometimes they were forced to retreat, humbled by weather, resistance, or misfortune. Each experience, whether triumphant or challenging, added to their collective knowledge, making them wiser, more cautious, and more daring. Yet the first raids were more than just acts of violence. They were a window into the wider world, revealing markets, cities, and cultures previously unknown to the Norse. A monk's silver chalice or a merchant's fine goods were not merely treasure, they were clues, hints of wealth, trade networks, and civilizations that could be approached, negotiated with, or conquered in the years to come. The raids planted the seeds of future expansion, settlement, and trade. It is important to remember that these early Viking raids were not random chaos. They were deliberate, thoughtful, and deeply connected to the rhythms of Norse life. Men returned home not only with material gain, but with stories to share. They spoke of foreign lands, strange customs, and distant shores. Their tales inspired other young men to take to the sea, encouraged families to prepare for voyages, and gradually created the image of the Viking as a figure of both fear and fascination across Europe. Imagine the quiet after a raid, longships resting in hidden bays, oars dripping with seawater, and the crew sharing a simple meal of dried fish and bread. Laughter, tension, and reflection mix as stories of the day are told. Who fought bravely? Who was clever in navigating tides and rivers? What treasures were captured? These moments, calm yet charged with experience, are as much a part of the Viking story as the battles themselves. The first raids were the beginning of a transformation. The Norse, who had once been confined to fjords and valleys, began to see themselves as part of a larger world, a world filled with opportunity, risk, and adventure. They learned that the sea was not just a barrier, but a pathway, that courage and cunning could open doors, and that their longships could carry them farther than imagination alone. These raids laid the foundation for everything that followed: the settlements, the trade, the legends, and the enduring mystique of the Vikings. So, as you drift tonight, dear friend, imagine yourself on the deck of a longship, watching the coastline of a distant land approach. Feel the excitement and tension. Hear the whispers of your companions. Sense the cold spray of the sea, and understand that this was the beginning of an age. The first raids were small steps into a vast world, yet they carried the force of history, the thrill of adventure, and the quiet lessons of courage and curiosity that would define the Viking spirit for generations. As the first raids etched their mark into the chronicles of Europe, the Vikings' ambitions stretched beyond the initial shores of Lindisfarne. The longships, perfected through skill and patience, carried these daring travelers further west toward the lands of Britain and Ireland, places filled with both promise and peril. Imagine the North Sea stretching endlessly before you, silver waves glinting in the pale sunlight, the wind in your hair, and the smell of salt and pine blending into a rhythm that has guided generations of Norse sailors. The British Isles presented a complex tapestry of kingdoms, monasteries, and villages. Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, and other realms each had their own rulers, their own defenses, and their own treasures. To the Vikings, this land was a new horizon, one that offered wealth, opportunities for settlement, and the thrill of challenge. And so, slowly and deliberately, they pressed onward, guided by their knowledge of the sea, the stars, and the tales of those who had gone before. Ireland, with its fertile valleys, sprawling rivers, and rich monastic centers, became a particular focus of Viking exploration. The monks who lived there cultivated not only the land, but also manuscripts, treasures, and silver, making them attractive targets for raiders seeking both wealth and renown. Yet the Vikings were not merely destroyers. They were observers, learners, and negotiators. They recognized the value of alliances, of trade, and of strategic settlements. They did not only strike and retreat, they often returned to settle, to establish a presence that would endure for generations. Imagine a small Viking fleet approaching the Irish coast. The longships slip silently into bays and rivers, their curved prows slicing through calm waters. The Norse warriors, alert but composed, observe the villages and monasteries, noting the patterns of life, the strength of defenses, and the opportunities for trade or plunder. In some instances, raids were swift and brutal. In others, they were cautious, measured, almost ritualistic. Every movement was calculated. Every decision weighed against risk and reward. In Ireland, the Vikings established coastal towns that would become enduring centers of trade and influence. Dublin, founded around 841 AD, grew from a simple encampment into a thriving settlement, bustling with merchants, craftsmen, and sailors. Limerick, Waterford, and Cork also saw Viking influence, each location chosen for its strategic value along rivers and coastlines. These settlements were not merely temporary camps, they were new homes, new communities, blending Norse culture with local traditions. Across Britain, the story was similar. Vikings did not just raid, they carved out areas of control, integrating themselves into the local political landscape. The Danelaw, established in parts of England, became a region where Norse law, language, and customs influenced the existing Anglo-Saxon structures. Trade, marriage alliances, and cultural exchange occurred alongside occasional conflict, creating a nuanced and enduring impact that went far beyond initial raids. The Vikings' presence in Britain and Ireland was also shaped by the landscape. Rivers were highways, carrying longships deep into the interior, while forests and hills provided both refuge and vantage points. Knowledge of tides, winds, and seasonal patterns was critical. Navigators used not only the sun and stars, but also subtle signs in the water, the flight of birds, and even the behavior of whales to guide their journeys. This intimate connection with nature was a hallmark of the Viking approach to expansion. It was not recklessness, but deep observation and understanding. In these Western lands, Vikings were also cultural transmitters. They introduced new methods of shipbuilding, metalwork, and trade practices. They contributed to the growth of urban centers, bringing crafts, markets, and connections to wider European networks. Yet they also absorbed local knowledge, languages, and customs, creating a fusion of Norse and Celtic, Norse and Anglo-Saxon that would leave lasting marks on the history of the British Isles. Life in these new settlements was a balance of adventure and routine. Farmers planted crops, fishermen cast nets into rivers, blacksmiths hammered at their forges, and merchants traveled between towns. Children played in the streets, while skalds recited tales of gods and heroes by the fireside. Warriors, though vigilant, were part of the community, their skills both a defense and a source of local prestige. In this way, the Vikings became not just outsiders or raiders, but participants in the evolving story of Britain and Ireland. Imagine, as you drift along in thought tonight, standing at the edge of a Viking settlement on an Irish riverbank. Hear the clatter of the marketplace, the rhythmic hammering of a smith, the laughter of children, and the songs of skalds. Smell the mingling scents of fish, bread, and pine from the longships. Watch as men and women prepare for a journey downriver or across the sea, their longships gleaming in the sunlight. This is not just history, it is a living, breathing world, one shaped by courage, curiosity, and adaptation. The expansion westward illustrates the Viking duality. They were both raiders and settlers, destroyers and builders, strangers and neighbors. Their voyages brought fear to some, hope to others, and a profound reshaping of the lands they touched. Through Britain and Ireland, the Vikings extended their influence, their culture, and their presence far beyond the fjords of Scandinavia, leaving a legacy that would endure in place names, language, and genetic traces for centuries. And so, dear friend, as your thoughts grow quiet and your mind drifts, imagine these longships gliding along rivers, towns bustling under the sun, and the Norse exploring, trading, and settling. Feel the rhythm of oars, the sway of the vessels, the pulse of life in the settlements, and the quiet determination of a people who moved westward into unknown lands, carrying their culture, their courage, and their stories with them. As the Vikings pressed westward across Britain and Ireland, their longships and adventurous spirits did not stop there. The horizon beckoned southward toward the lands of the Frankish kingdoms, modern-day France, and beyond. Imagine, if you will, the soft creak of timber, the spray of salt water on your face, and the rhythmic movement of oars slicing through calm rivers as Viking ships glide steadily toward new lands, full of opportunity, wealth, and challenge. The Frankish kingdoms, with their fertile lands, bustling towns, and grand monasteries were a tempting target. These regions were often wealthy, politically fragmented, and vulnerable along rivers like the Seine, the Loire, and the Garonne. The Vikings, ever attentive and patient, observed patterns of river traffic, tides, and local defenses, preparing meticulously for each journey. Unlike small-scale raids, some expeditions were carefully planned campaigns, combining speed, strategy, and knowledge of both land and water. One of the most famous events of this southward expansion was the Siege of Paris. In 845 AD, a fleet led by the legendary Viking chieftain Ragnar Lodbrok, or at least a figure whom legend would celebrate, made its way up the Seine River. Paris, a walled city of significant wealth and culture, seemed impregnable, yet the Vikings pressed onward with their longships, capable of navigating both open waters and narrow rivers. They reached the gates of the city, striking fear into the hearts of its inhabitants. Historical records describe a combination of intimidation, negotiation, and payment of tribute that allowed the Vikings to leave with silver, gold, and honor. This pattern, both aggressive and pragmatic, would repeat in the decades that followed. The Vikings' ventures into the Frankish kingdoms were not limited to raids. Many Norsemen began to establish settlements, integrating into local political structures. Some even became mercenaries or rulers, offering their formidable skills in exchange for land or influence. In time, these Norse settlers would leave lasting legacies. Normandy, a region in northern France, owes its very name, derived from Northmen, to these early Viking settlers. They brought with them not only military prowess, but also agricultural knowledge, maritime skill, and cultural traditions, gradually blending with the local populations. Trade was another driving force in this southern expansion. Viking merchants, far from merely looting, recognized the value of goods, markets, and long-term connections. Silver coins from distant lands, fine textiles, spices, and other treasures flowed through their hands, linking Scandinavia with the wider European economy. By establishing strategic outposts along rivers and coasts, they could control trade routes, ensuring both wealth and influence. It was a sophisticated understanding of economics as much as it was of warfare. Navigating the rivers of France required patience, skill, and cooperation. Viking crews would carefully chart depths, avoid hidden shoals, and maneuver around castles or fortified towns. They relied on knowledge passed down through generations, signs from the natural world, and a keen sense of timing. Each voyage was a blend of courage, calculation, and respect for the unpredictable forces of nature. Storms could rise without warning, and a miscalculation could mean disaster. Yet for the Vikings, the risk was always balanced by the possibility of reward, whether in treasure, fame, or the thrill of a successful journey. Beyond France, some Vikings ventured even further into the Mediterranean, reaching Spain, Italy, and North Africa. These expeditions were rare, challenging, and daring. They required ships capable of long voyages, crews resilient enough to endure unfamiliar waters, and leaders bold enough to navigate political complexities far from home. Along the way, they encountered cultures vastly different from their own, absorbing knowledge, trading goods, and sometimes clashing with local powers. These southern journeys reveal the full extent of Viking ambition, adaptability, and curiosity. Life in these southern regions varied depending on the circumstances. Some Vikings returned home after successful raids, their longships laden with treasure, their stories inspiring awe and admiration. Others stayed, intermarrying with local populations, building fortifications, and creating communities that combined Norse and local traditions. Here, as in Britain and Ireland, the Vikings were not merely invaders, they were settlers, traders, and participants in a larger world. Imagine, as you drift further into thought, standing at the prow of a longship moving up the Seine. The wind fills the sail, the oars move in rhythm, and the landscape shifts from wild riverbanks to bustling towns. You see Paris's walls looming ahead, hear the murmur of frightened residents, smell the forested banks along the river, and feel the quiet tension of anticipation and strategy. This is history in motion, the convergence of courage, skill, and destiny. The southern expansion teaches us much about the Vikings' character. They were not reckless marauders, they were observers, planners, and adaptive navigators of both water and culture. They combined force with negotiation, strategy with skill, and ambition with respect for opportunity. Through France and beyond, the Vikings extended their influence, leaving marks on geography, politics, trade, and culture that would endure for generations. So tonight, dear friend, as your thoughts grow gentle and slow, picture the longships gliding down the rivers of France, carrying crews of brave men and women into new lands. Imagine the rhythm of oars, the flutter of sails, the glint of treasure in the sun, and the quiet courage required for each voyage. In understanding the Vikings' southern expansion, we see the full scope of their reach, the daring, the intelligence, and the restless curiosity that propelled them from the fjords of Scandinavia to the heart of Europe, leaving ripples of history that continue to echo even today. As the longships sailed into distant lands and the Vikings' reputation grew, it becomes clear that their world was not only one of raids and conquest. Behind the tales of battles and treasures lies another story, quieter yet equally powerful, the story of trade and commerce. For the Vikings were not only warriors and explorers, they were merchants, navigators of markets, and connectors of civilizations, moving goods, ideas, and culture across vast distances. Imagine a bustling Viking settlement on a northern river, the masts of longships swaying in the gentle current, smoke rising from hearths, and people moving purposefully through streets filled with the sense of baking bread, salted fish, and fresh timber. Merchants from distant lands arrive with goods carried over land and sea, fine silks, spices, amber, silver coins, and intricately crafted tools. Here, the Vikings' shrewdness and curiosity come to life as they barter, negotiate, and establish connections that would sustain communities for generations. Trade was a sophisticated endeavor. Vikings understood value, scarcity, and opportunity. Silver was highly prized, often weighed rather than counted, and could be used in exchange for everything from horses to spices, amber from the Baltic, furs from the northern forests, and finely crafted weapons moved across networks connecting Scandinavia with Europe, the Middle East, and even as far as Central Asia. These routes were not only about goods, they were about knowledge, alliances, and the spread of culture. The Vikings also established strategic trade centers to facilitate this commerce. Hedeby, Ribe, and Birka were among the most important, acting as hubs for merchants from the north, west, and east. At these settlements, goods from distant lands were exchanged, legal disputes were mediated, and news traveled swiftly. Imagine walking through one of these towns, the air filled with voices in multiple languages, the clatter of carts on cobblestones, the aroma of roasting meats and fresh bread, and the gleam of silver coins passing from hand to hand. It was a vibrant, dynamic world, alive with human enterprise and curiosity. Beyond the immediate settlements, Viking traders ventured far afield. In the east, they navigated rivers such as the Dnieper and Volga, connecting with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic caliphates. Here, they traded furs, slaves, and silver for spices, silk, and precious stones. In the west, their ships carried goods to England, Ireland, and the Frankish territories, often combining trade with raiding as opportunity allowed. Each voyage demanded knowledge, planning, and the ability to adapt to unpredictable circumstances, whether navigating unfamiliar waters or negotiating with new peoples. Trade was deeply connected to social structure and prestige. Wealth acquired through commerce could elevate a family's standing, fund shipbuilding, or support warriors on future expeditions. It allowed the Vikings to maintain networks of influence far beyond their homelands and provided the resources necessary to sustain communities during long winters or difficult times. Success in trade, like success in raids, became part of the measure of honor and reputation, recorded and remembered in sagas and oral histories. Merchants were respected figures, possessing skills that went beyond brute strength. They needed intelligence, foresight, and diplomacy. A successful trader understood the rhythms of markets, the relative value of goods, and the subtleties of human behavior. They knew when to buy, when to sell, and when to strike bargains that could enrich both themselves and their communities. In this sense, Viking commerce was as much a form of mastery as their navigation of seas or skill in battle. Imagine a Viking trader arriving at a Byzantine port. The scent of spices fills the air. Sailors call across the docks in languages strange to the ears, and goods from all corners of the known world are stacked along the quays. The Viking exchanges furs for silks, silver for exotic fruits, amber for finely wrought jewelry. Each transaction is a careful negotiation, a dance of knowledge, intuition, and patience. And when the longship sets sail again, it carries more than goods. It carries stories, strategies, and a sense of the vast world that awaits. Trade also fostered cultural exchange. Through commerce, the Vikings absorbed ideas, technologies, and practices from distant lands. Weapons, ship designs, and artistic motifs traveled along these networks. Even religion and social customs were influenced as Vikings encountered new peoples. In this way, trade was not simply economic, it was a conduit for innovation, learning, and adaptation. It helped shape a Viking identity that was dynamic, resourceful, and connected to a wider world than most might imagine. Even within their homelands, trade was vital. Local craftspeople produced tools, weapons, textiles, and art that circulated in markets. Communities depended on access to goods from beyond their immediate environment, whether metals for tools, salt for preservation, or luxury items to display status. Trade strengthened internal cohesion, allowing settlements to thrive, families to prosper, and the next generation of explorers, warriors, and merchants to prepare for journeys far beyond Scandinavia. So, dear friend, as you imagine the Viking world tonight, picture the busy docks, the bustling marketplaces, and the longships carrying treasures across rivers, seas, and oceans. Hear the call of merchants, the gentle lapping of water against the hulls, the clinking of silver coins, and the quiet confidence of a people who could balance courage with commerce, strength with negotiation. Trade was the quieter power of the Vikings, the thread that connected lands, peoples, and ideas, weaving a legacy that would endure long after the echoes of battle had faded. And as you drift further into the soft rhythm of history, remember this. The Vikings were not defined solely by raids or warfare. They were merchants, innovators, and connectors of worlds. Through trade, they expanded their horizons, enriched their communities, and left a mark on the global stage, showing that curiosity, intelligence, and adaptability are as vital as courage and strength in shaping history. Now that we've explored the Vikings' trades and travels, let us drift even farther west into lands that were once uncharted and wild, yet beckoned with opportunity and challenge. Beyond Britain, Ireland, and the coasts of France, the Norse looked to the open Atlantic, guided by courage, curiosity, and the mastery of their longships. It is here, in Iceland and Greenland, that we begin to see Vikings not merely as raiders or traders, but as settlers and colonizers, shaping new worlds with the same resilience and ingenuity that defined their people. Imagine the North Atlantic in the late 9th century, cold waters stretching endlessly, waves rising and falling beneath a gray sky, and the roar of the wind mingling with the creak of longships. Early Norse explorers, possibly led by figures like Nadodr and Floki Vilgerdarson, ventured into these unknown waters, seeking new lands to settle. The first glimpses of Iceland, a rugged island dotted with volcanoes, fjords, and rivers, must have been both awe-inspiring and daunting. Yet the promise of fertile soil, abundant resources, and a chance to start anew drew these settlers with quiet determination. Settling in Iceland required more than bravery. It demanded knowledge, planning, and adaptability. The Norse surveyed the land carefully, selecting sites with access to fresh water, arable land, and shelter from harsh winds. They built longhouses from timber and turf, mirroring those left behind in Scandinavia, but adapted to the local climate. Roofs were steep to shed snow, walls thick to hold warmth, and hearths central to daily life. In these early settlements, families tilled fields, raised livestock, fished the rivers and coastlines, and created communities that balanced self-sufficiency with cooperation. Icelandic society quickly developed its own character. Governance was established through assemblies called things, where free men gathered to make decisions, resolve disputes, and enforce laws. These gatherings fostered a sense of community, fairness, and shared responsibility, reflecting the values carried from the Norse homelands, but adapted to a new environment. Even in these remote landscapes, the Vikings maintained the cultural practices, stories, and rituals that defined them, creating a continuity of identity while navigating the challenges of colonization. Beyond Iceland, attention turned to Greenland. Further west, a land more remote, colder and harsher, yet promising in its resources. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland, is often credited with leading the first Greenlandic settlement around 985 AD. The journey was perilous, with icy seas, treacherous currents, and unpredictable weather testing both ships and crews. Yet the Viking spirit, a blend of determination, skill, and vision, carried them forward. Greenland offered grazing lands for livestock, hunting opportunities for seals and walruses, and a strategic position for exploration further west. Life in Greenland required resilience. Winters were long and unforgiving, summers short and precious. Settlers adapted to the environment, combining traditional Norse farming methods with hunting and fishing techniques suited to the Arctic conditions. They built turf and stone houses, raised sheep, goats, and cattle, and preserved food carefully to survive the winter months. Isolation demanded cooperation, trust, and the ability to endure both physical and emotional challenges. Yet even in such harsh conditions, life was vibrant. Families gathered by hearths, stories were recited, and celebrations marked the rhythms of nature. The Greenland settlements were also stepping stones for further exploration. From these icy shores, Vikings eventually sailed westward, reaching Vinland, a land scholars associate with the northern regions of modern Newfoundland. This westward expansion demonstrates the Vikings' remarkable adaptability and ambition. They navigated unknown waters, encountered unfamiliar environments, and attempted to establish settlements thousands of miles from home, all with the knowledge, tools, and skills they had developed over generations. These settlements were not permanent in all cases, but they illustrate a critical aspect of Viking culture: the drive to explore, adapt, and create new opportunities. They balanced risk and reward, blending courage with careful planning, and in doing so, extended the boundaries of the known world. Trade, survival, and the creation of community were intertwined, shaping a lifestyle that was both challenging and profoundly human. Imagine, as you settle further into thought tonight, standing on a grassy slope in Iceland, watching sheep graze against the backdrop of volcanic peaks, or gazing across Greenland's icy fjords, feeling the wind on your face and the salt of the sea in the air. Hear the quiet rhythm of daily life, children playing, livestock calling, the crackle of hearth fires, and understand the resilience and creativity that allowed these settlers to thrive in lands so distant and unforgiving. Through these settlements, the Vikings left a lasting mark on the North Atlantic. Iceland became a center of Norse culture, law, and literature, preserving sagas and genealogies that continue to captivate us today. Greenland, though eventually abandoned due to climate change and isolation, served as a testament to human endurance and ambition. And the journeys further west remind us that the Viking spirit was not constrained by fear or distance. It was fueled by curiosity, adaptability, and a willingness to step into the unknown. So tonight, dear friend, as your thoughts grow quiet and gentle, imagine these far-flung settlements, the lives of the settlers, and the vast, open waters that carried them. Picture longhouses built with care, fields tilled against the wind, fires crackling with warmth, and stories whispered from one generation to the next. In understanding Viking colonization from Iceland to Greenland, we see the courage, resilience, and imagination that allowed a people from the cold fjords of Scandinavia to reach across the Atlantic, shaping new worlds and leaving ripples of history that still resonate today. Now that we have drifted across the North Atlantic to Iceland and Greenland, it is time to step inside the lives of those who settled these distant lands. Imagine the rugged landscapes, the sharp cliffs, the icy fjords, and the soft green valleys where Norse families carved out new lives. Though these colonies were far from the familiar fjords of Scandinavia, the rhythms of daily life remained deeply rooted in tradition, tempered by adaptation to a harsher, more isolated environment. The longhouse remained the centerpiece of each settlement, its turf walls thick against wind and snow, its roof steep to shed winter's weight. Inside, the hearth glowed warmly, a source of both heat and sustenance. Families gathered around the fire for meals of salted fish, smoked meat, barley porridge, and dairy products. Meals were communal, binding households together, while stories of gods, ancestors, and distant lands were shared in the flickering firelight, carrying both entertainment and moral lessons. Children grew up learning the skills required for survival in these remote regions. They helped with herding sheep, milking goats, gathering firewood, and fishing along rivers and coasts. Education was practical, often intertwined with oral tradition. Elders taught tales of Odin, Thor, and Freyja, instilling courage, wisdom, and respect for both the human and natural worlds. Play and storytelling coexisted, fostering creativity, observation, and resilience in a generation destined to carry on the Viking legacy far from their Scandinavian roots. Farming, though more challenging than in milder climates, was essential. Fields were carefully chosen and protected. Crops like barley and rye were sown during short growing seasons, and livestock was vital for milk, meat, wool, and hides. In Greenland, for instance, settlers relied more heavily on hunting seals, walruses, and caribou, supplementing meager crops with the bounty of the land and sea. These activities demanded constant attention, careful planning, and cooperation, reinforcing the sense of interdependence within each community. Craftsmanship flourished even in these isolated colonies. Blacksmiths forged tools, axes, and nails essential for building and survival. Woodworkers carved functional and decorative items from furniture to household utensils. Leather workers prepared hides for clothing, shoes, and bags, while women spun wool and wove textiles to provide warmth during the long winters. Each task, though practical, carried a sense of artistry and care, reflecting the Vikings' deep respect for skill, patience, and utility. Trade within the colonies and with the outside world remained crucial. Goods such as furs, walrus, ivory, and iron were exchanged, connecting these remote settlements to the broader Norse network. Ships would carry cargo to and from Iceland, Greenland, and occasionally even further afield, maintaining contact with kin, supplying essential resources, and bringing news from distant lands. The act of trade was both economic and social, reinforcing alliances and sustaining communities across vast distances. Religious and cultural practices remained central to daily life. Even in the far north, families observed rituals to honor the gods, marking births, marriages, and deaths with ceremonies. Offerings might be left at sacred groves or near prominent stones, and feasts were held to celebrate seasonal changes. Storytelling and poetry continued to weave the sacred and the practical together, reminding settlers of their heritage and of the larger cosmic order in which they lived. Community gatherings were vital, especially in a landscape where isolation could be dangerous. Neighbors helped one another with construction, harvesting, and winter preparations. Assemblies, or things, provided a forum for justice, decision-making, and social cohesion, reflecting the democratic spirit carried from Scandinavia. Even in these far-flung colonies, cooperation and shared responsibility were essential for survival and well-being. Daily life also involved vigilance and defense. Though these colonies were remote, conflict with neighboring groups or environmental challenges required alertness. The longships were maintained, weapons kept in good repair, and skills in combat and navigation passed down to younger generations. Preparedness was not merely about fear, it was a practical aspect of life, blending discipline with the everyday rhythms of work and play. Evenings were times of reflection and connection. Families would gather around the hearth, warming themselves against the cold outside. They would share stories of ancestors and distant lands, recounting voyages, raids, and discoveries. Music, singing, and poetry filled the longhouse, bringing comfort, continuity, and a sense of identity in lands far from home. These quiet moments of cultural preservation were as vital as hunting, farming, or trading. They were the threads that connected the New World to the Old. Life in the colonies, though challenging, was deeply human and profoundly rich. It was shaped by the harshness of climate, the demands of survival, and the opportunities of exploration, yet it was filled with laughter, learning, and community. Each day carried a balance of work, ritual, education, and storytelling, blending the practical and the sacred into a seamless rhythm of existence. Imagine, dear friend, standing at the edge of a Greenland fjord at dusk. The wind is cold but gentle, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Smoke drifts from the longhouses, and inside, families are gathered around the hearth. Children listen intently as elders recount tales of Odin's wisdom and Thor's might. Dogs bark in the distance, livestock settle for the night, and the quiet waves lap against the shore. This is the pulse of daily life in the Viking colonies, steady, resilient, and alive with human ingenuity and spirit. As you drift further into thought, let the rhythm of these northern settlements soothe your mind. The creak of timber, the murmur of voices, the crackle of fires, and the steady presence of nature in every breath. Daily life in the colonies was not just survival, it was adaptation, connection, and the continuation of a culture that had traveled across oceans, rivers, and fjords to take root in new lands. It was a life of quiet heroism, resilience, and belonging, echoing across the centuries. Now, dear friend, let us shift our gaze from the quiet rhythms of daily life to the intensity of the battlefield, where the Vikings' courage, skill, and ingenuity were tested. Viking warfare was not chaos, it was a careful orchestration of strategy, discipline, and adaptability. Imagine the early morning fog lifting off a fjord, the wind rustling through pine trees, and the soft creak of longships approaching foreign shores. As warriors, prepare not only for battle, but for the survival of their families, communities, and honor. The Viking warrior was trained from youth in the arts of combat. Boys learned to handle weapons, to move with precision, and to maintain discipline under pressure. Axes, swords, spears, and bows were the tools of their craft, each chosen carefully for its function. Shields were round, sturdy, and often decorated with intricate designs, serving both defense and a psychological purpose. Intimidation. Armor varied from chainmail to leather and padded garments, but clever use of strategy often mattered more than heavy protection. Tactics were central to Viking success. Raids often relied on speed, surprise, and coordination. Longships could carry dozens of warriors silently along rivers, striking before local defenders could organize. Once ashore, Vikings would form shield walls, a tactic that maximized collective strength while protecting individual fighters. This formation required trust, discipline, and practice, each warrior knowing their place and the rhythm of those beside them. It was not only a test of strength, but of unity. Viking strategy extended beyond direct combat. Reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and careful planning were all part of the preparation for raids or battles. Leaders observed tides, currents, and terrain to choose the best landing points. Knowledge of local settlements, fortifications, and even political alliances helped determine whether to negotiate, raid, or withdraw. Flexibility was crucial, as unexpected weather, resistance, or geography could quickly change the outcome. The Vikings' ability to adapt to circumstances often gave them an advantage over larger but less agile forces. One of the most famous aspects of Viking warfare was their use of mobility. The combination of longships and skilled rowing allowed warriors to strike coastal villages, monasteries, and towns, then retreat quickly before reinforcements could arrive. This mobility, paired with the element of surprise, was a force multiplier. It meant that even small groups could have outsized impact, creating fear and uncertainty among those who might otherwise be better equipped or more numerous. Viking raids also involved careful psychological tactics. The sight of longships approaching over the horizon, the sounds of horns or shouting, and the display of banners or carved prows were designed to intimidate. These elements were as effective as weapons, creating fear that could sometimes cause defenders to surrender or flee without a fight. Warfare, in this sense, was both physical and psychological, a blend of skill, cunning, and understanding of human nature. Leadership was another crucial component. Chieftains and commanders needed not only bravery, but strategic vision. They coordinated fleets, planned attacks, managed supplies, and ensured discipline among their warriors. The respect of the warriors was essential. Leadership was earned through skill, courage, and wisdom, rather than granted by birth alone. Legends and sagas often recount these leaders' deeds, highlighting both their strategic brilliance and personal valor. Vikings also employed clever siege tactics and improvisation. They understood the weaknesses of fortifications, the power of mobility, and the advantages of terrain. Quick assaults, feints, and encirclements were used to overwhelm enemies. Even when facing stronger or more fortified opponents, the Vikings' ability to think creatively and act decisively often turned the tide. Success required a combination of planning, skill, courage, and a willingness to exploit opportunity. Weaponry, though important, was part of a larger system of warfare. Swords, axes, and spears were chosen for efficiency and durability. Bows allowed attacks from a distance, while shields protected and strengthened formations. The Viking warrior was trained not only in individual combat, but in coordinated maneuvers, understanding the rhythm of battle, and responding to signals from leaders or the environment. It was a balance of personal skill and collective effort. Even beyond the battlefield, warfare shaped Viking society. Raids brought wealth, resources, and prestige, while failures or miscalculations carried consequences. Stories of battles, heroic deeds, and clever strategies were passed down through generations, shaping identity, morality, and the cultural imagination. Warfare was intertwined with honor, duty, and survival, influencing decisions in daily life, politics, and exploration. Imagine, as you drift into thought tonight, standing on a misty shore, as longships approach silently, warriors adjust their grips on shields and spears, the wind fills sails, and the tension of anticipation is palpable. Yet within this intensity, there is discipline, coordination, and strategy, a rhythm that balances risk and skill, strength and cunning. This is Viking warfare, controlled, adaptable, and deeply connected to both the environment and human ingenuity. Through these tactics and strategies, the Vikings became feared and respected across Europe. Their success was not merely due to courage or brute force, but to intelligence, preparation, adaptability, and understanding of both terrain and human nature. Every raid, skirmish, or battle was a lesson, building experience that would shape the Viking world for generations. And so, dear friend, as you relax into the rhythm of this story, imagine the shield walls, the longships slicing through the water, and the careful strategy behind every action. Feel the quiet discipline beneath the roar of battle, the anticipation of warriors prepared for challenge, and the wisdom guiding each move. Viking warfare was not chaos, it was order within danger, courage tempered by planning, and action informed by intelligence, leaving a legacy that would be remembered long after the echoes of swords had faded. Now, dear friend, let us step into a world of imagination, where the sounds of the sea are replaced by the rustle of parchment and the soft murmur of voices recounting tales that have traveled across centuries. The Viking sagas are more than stories. They are the lifeblood of Norse culture, a blend of history, myth, morality, and adventure, told and retold around fires in longhouses and passed down through generations. They are the whispers of the past, carrying the deeds of gods, heroes, and ordinary people into the present. Imagine a longhouse at dusk, the wind outside brushing against the turf walls, the hearth crackling with warmth. Families sit together, listening intently as a skald, a storyteller and poet, begins to weave a tale. The sagas might speak of Odin, the wise all-father, who sacrificed an eye for knowledge, or Thor, whose mighty hammer Mjolnir strikes down giants and chaos. The stories are vivid, full of color, sound, and movement, yet told in a rhythm that lulls listeners, connecting them to lessons of courage, loyalty, and cleverness. The sagas are deeply intertwined with Viking history. Some recount real events, raids, voyages, battles, and family lineages, though often embroidered with myth and interpretation. Others are purely legendary, exploring the adventures of heroes whose bravery, cunning, or moral choices illuminate the values of the culture. In listening to or reading a saga, one is transported into a world where human experience and divine influence intermingle, where courage and wisdom are measured not just by deeds, but by the understanding of fate and the cosmos. One of the most famous sagas is the saga of the Inglings, tracing the lineage of kings from the earliest Norse rulers to those who settled new lands. Another, the saga of Eric the Red, recounts the bold exploration and colonization of Greenland, blending adventure, survival, and human ingenuity. And there are tales of legendary heroes like Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, whose courage, strategy, and tragic choices reflect timeless truths about honor, ambition, and consequence. Each saga carries layers of meaning, offering both entertainment and insight into the Viking worldview. Storytelling was both communal and performative. Skalds used rhythm, repetition, and poetic devices to captivate listeners, ensuring that tales were memorable and emotionally resonant. The audience participated as well, responding with gasps, laughter, or applause, and sometimes even contributing to the unfolding narrative. In this way, the sagas were living traditions, adapting to each teller and listener while preserving the essence of Norse culture and history. The sagas also provided moral guidance. They explored themes of loyalty, bravery, vengeance, justice, and the consequences of choices. Heroes might face impossible odds, wrestle with destiny, or make difficult decisions that shaped their fates and those of their communities. Through these narratives, listeners learned not only about the world around them, but also about the values that guided their society: honor, courage, wisdom, and respect for both the gods and their fellow humans. Myth and reality often blend seamlessly in the sagas. Giants, trolls, and supernatural beings inhabit the same landscapes as kings, warriors, and settlers. Battles might be fought with swords and shields, but fate and prophecy weave through the narrative, reminding listeners that humans are part of a larger cosmic order. This mixture of the fantastical and the historical makes the sagas uniquely immersive, transporting one across time, space, and imagination while grounding the story in human experience. Artistry was central to the sagas. Language was used carefully, each word chosen for sound, rhythm, and meaning. Repetition reinforced key events or themes, while dialogue revealed character and intention. Symbolism, allegory, and metaphor enriched the narratives, allowing listeners to see beyond the surface, action into deeper lessons about life, mortality, and morality. The sagas were, in essence, both education and entertainment, poetry and history, passed from one generation to the next with reverence. Imagine, dear friend, leaning back in a warm longhouse, the wind outside brushing against the turf walls, and the gentle glow of the hearth illuminating faces as a skald recounts the tale of Thor's journey to Jotunheim, or Sigurd's encounter with the dragon Fafnir. Hear the cadence of words, feel the suspense and triumph, and sense the wisdom threaded through each episode. This is a world alive with human emotion, divine influence, and the timeless interplay of courage, intelligence, and fate. The sagas also served to connect people across generations and geographies through storytelling. Families remembered ancestors, communities celebrated shared heritage, and distant lands were brought into the imagination of listeners who might never leave their valleys or fjords. The sagas preserved knowledge of journeys, settlements, battles, and alliances, ensuring that history and legend traveled together, inseparable and enduring. Even today, the Viking sagas continue to captivate. They offer a glimpse into the minds, hearts, and spirits of a people who lived in harmony with the harsh northern landscapes, who explored distant shores, and who balanced practical skill with imagination, courage with wisdom. Through these stories, we hear the voice of the Viking past, resonating across centuries, inviting us to explore not only the adventures of heroes and gods, but also the values and dreams that shaped a remarkable culture. So, dear friend, as you drift further into thought tonight, imagine the longhouse, the firelight, and the storyteller's voice. Feel the rhythm of words and the quiet pulse of imagination traveling across fjords, rivers, and oceans. In understanding the sagas, you glimpse the soul of the Vikings, their courage, wisdom, curiosity, and creativity woven into tales that continue to echo, inviting reflection, inspiration, and peaceful drift into sleep. Now, dear friend, let us turn our attention inward to the heart of the Viking worldview, a world in which gods, spirits, and cosmic forces intertwined with daily life. Viking religion was not merely a set of rituals, it was a living, breathing framework that gave meaning to the winds, the waves, the seasons, and the journeys of both the body and the soul. Imagine standing on a rugged coastline at dawn, the sea mist curling around your feet, the distant mountains painted gold by the rising sun, and sensing a world alive with both visible and invisible forces. Central to Viking belief was a pantheon of gods, each with their own personalities, domains, and stories. Odin, the All-Father, was a god of wisdom, war, and death, whose single-eyed gaze penetrated both human and divine realms. Thor, with his mighty hammer, Mjolnir, was a protector of humanity, battling giants and chaos to maintain order. Freya embodied love, fertility, and war, her power felt in both growth and conflict. These gods were not distant abstractions. They were relatable, human-like in their emotions and ambitions, yet immortal, powerful, and deserving of respect and honor. Viking beliefs were deeply connected to nature. Mountains, rivers, forests, and the open sea were imbued with spirits and significance. Sacred groves, large stones, and particular landscapes served as sites for offerings and rituals. The natural world was both a provider and a challenge, and reverence for its forces was central to survival. Each voyage, hunt, or harvest carried a sense of ritual acknowledgement, a way to harmonize human action with the greater rhythms of the world. Rituals and offerings were common expressions of faith. Families might leave food, drink, or crafted items at sacred sites to honor the gods or seek their favor. During major festivals, communities gathered to celebrate seasonal changes, fertility, and protection. These ceremonies were moments of unity, reflection, and gratitude, blending spirituality with practical concerns, such as ensuring a bountiful harvest or safe travels across the sea. Vikings also believed in fate, or word, a concept that acknowledged forces beyond human control. While courage, skill, and planning were important, outcomes were ultimately influenced by destiny. This belief imbued life with both humility and purpose. Even the mightiest warrior or wisest leader understood that success depended not only on effort, but also on alignment with fate and the favor of the gods. Acceptance of this balance between free will and destiny shaped decision making, courage, and resilience. The afterlife was another important aspect of belief. Brave warriors who died in battle were said to go to Valhalla, Odin's hall, where they would feast, train, and prepare for the final battle at Ragnarok. Others might journey to Hel, a shadowy realm ruled by the goddess Hel, reflecting the natural order and the inevitability of mortality. These beliefs offered comfort, purpose, and a framework for understanding life, death, and the legacy of one's actions. Seers and spiritual guides, often called vulvas, played important roles in Viking society. They interpreted omens, offered guidance, and conducted rituals to communicate with the divine. Their wisdom helped shape decisions about voyages, battles, settlements, and community life. In a world of uncertainty, their counsel was highly valued, providing reassurance and insight amid the unpredictable forces of nature and human endeavor. Viking religion also emphasized honor, courage, and loyalty, integrating moral lessons into both belief and action. Stories of gods and heroes provided models for behavior, illustrating the rewards of bravery, the consequences of betrayal, and the importance of generosity and wisdom. These values were not abstract. They were lived daily, reflected in family life, leadership, trade, and exploration. Even in distant colonies, these beliefs persisted. In Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland, settlers maintained rituals, celebrated seasonal festivals, and shared the stories of gods and heroes. The religion provided continuity, linking far-flung communities to a shared heritage and identity. It guided their interactions with the natural world, with neighbors, and with the unknown, fostering resilience, purpose, and cohesion. Imagine, dear friend, standing in a quiet grove at twilight. The air is cool, the smell of pine and earth grounding you. A soft offering of food rests on a stone, and the faint whisper of prayer mingles with the rustle of leaves. You sense the presence of forces larger than yourself, watchful and powerful, yet intimately connected to the rhythms of daily life. This is the world of Viking belief, alive, practical, and profound. Through these spiritual practices, the Vikings balanced courage with humility, action with reflection, and exploration with reverence. Their gods, rituals, and moral codes shaped not only how they fought or settled new lands, but also how they understood life itself. Religion was the lens through which the world made sense, offering meaning, guidance, and a connection to both the past and the mysteries beyond. So tonight, as you drift into the soft quiet of sleep, imagine the Viking worldview in all its depth, the gods above, the spirits of the land, the invisible threads of fate, and the enduring connection between human effort and cosmic order. In understanding Viking religion and beliefs, you glimpse a culture that navigated the uncertainties of life with courage, wisdom, and reverence, carrying their faith into every journey, settlement, and story that shaped their remarkable world. Now, dear friend, let us drift into a world of beauty, craftsmanship, and imagination, where the Vikings' practical lives intertwined with art, storytelling, and expression. Viking art and culture were not separate from daily existence. They were woven into the tools they used, the ships they built, the jewelry they wore, and the stories they told. Imagine sitting in a longhouse as the northern light filters through a small window, illuminating carved wood, woven textiles, and polished metal, each piece telling a story of skill, creativity, and meaning. Viking art was characterized by intricate patterns, flowing lines, and symbolic imagery. Animals, dragons, serpents, and mythical beings appeared in carvings on ships, weapons, and household items. These designs were not only decorative, but also imbued with significance, representing protection, power, or connection to the divine. The craftsmanship required patience, precision, and imagination, reflecting the Vikings' respect for both beauty and function. Longships themselves were masterpieces of design and artistry. The curved prows often featured carved dragons or serpents, meant to intimidate enemies and protect sailors during voyages. The construction of these vessels required advanced knowledge of wood, water, and aerodynamics. Yet even amid these technical achievements, artisans infused creativity and symbolism. Each ship told a story of craftsmanship, culture, and identity, carrying both people and ideas across the seas. Jewelry and personal adornment were another expression of Viking culture. Brooches, arm rings, necklaces, and rings were crafted from silver, bronze, and gold, often engraved with intricate patterns or symbolic designs. These items signified status, allegiance, and personal taste, and were frequently given as gifts to seal agreements or honor achievements. Beyond beauty, jewelry served as currency, symbols of loyalty, and markers of family heritage, connecting artistry to practical and social life. Textiles, too, reflected the Vikings' skill and aesthetic sensibilities. Wool and linen were spun, dyed, and woven into clothing that combined warmth, durability, and intricate decoration. Patterns often reflected natural elements, geometric designs, or symbolic motifs, blending functionality with artistry. Clothing was a statement of identity, a way to display social standing, and a medium for cultural expression, demonstrating that even daily garments could carry meaning and beauty. Woodworking and carving extended into domestic life. Bowls, furniture, tools, and household utensils were often adorned with patterns and motifs that transformed utilitarian objects into art. Even the simplest items could reflect skill, taste, and cultural symbolism. In crafting these objects, Viking artisans balanced form with function, producing work that was both practical and deeply expressive. Viking culture was also enriched by music, poetry, and storytelling. The skalds, or poets, were vital to preserving history, legend, and moral teachings. Their compositions combined rhythm, alliteration, and metaphor to convey complex narratives of gods, heroes, and historical events. Music accompanied work, celebration, and ritual, creating a shared rhythm that bound communities together. Instruments like harps, lyres, and flutes were played during feasts and gatherings, enhancing the atmosphere and connecting participants to tradition. Oral tradition was central to Viking identity. Stories, proverbs, and sagas carried lessons about courage, honor, loyalty, and the consequences of action. These narratives were performed with skill, shaping values and reinforcing communal bonds. In this way, art and culture were not merely aesthetic, they were a living framework for understanding the world, human behavior, and the relationship between individuals and their community. Viking art and culture were also influenced by contact with other lands. Through trade and exploration, Norse artisans encountered new materials, techniques, and motifs from the British Isles, the Frankish territories, the Mediterranean, and even the Middle East. These influences were absorbed, adapted, and integrated into Viking designs, creating a dynamic culture that evolved while retaining a distinct identity rooted in Scandinavian heritage. Imagine, dear friend, walking through a Viking settlement. See the carved doors of longhouses, the shimmer of silver jewelry, the colorful textiles, and the intricate weapons and tools displayed with pride. Hear the soft music of a lyre, the measured cadence of a skald reciting a tale, and the gentle hum of daily activity. Every object, every sound, and every design reflects skill, imagination, and the human desire to create meaning and beauty in life. Even in distant colonies, from Iceland to Greenland, these artistic and cultural practices persisted. They provided continuity, comfort, and identity, connecting settlers to their homeland while allowing adaptation to new environments. Art was both practical and symbolic, enriching daily life, expressing creativity, and reinforcing social and spiritual values. So tonight, as you relax into the gentle rhythm of thought, imagine the Vikings' art and culture surrounding you, the flowing patterns, the carved symbols, the shimmering jewelry, the woven fabrics, and the vibrant stories. In exploring their artistry, you glimpse a culture that celebrated skill, imagination, and meaning, where every object and every story was a testament to human ingenuity and the quiet beauty of life, even in the harsh northern world. Now, dear friend, let us drift once more to the edge of the sea, where the horizon meets endless water, and the rhythmic lapping of waves becomes a lullaby. Viking ships were not merely vessels, they were lifelines, extensions of human skill, and marvels of design that allowed the Norse to explore, trade, and conquer across vast distances. Imagine standing on the shore, feeling the salt spray, hearing the creak of timber, and observing these elegant, curved hulls that glide with quiet power over both river and ocean. The Longship was the heart of Viking exploration. Its design combined speed, stability, and versatility. Narrow and shallow, it could navigate rivers and open seas alike, slip silently into hidden coves, and turn quickly in battle or evasion. The hulls were carefully constructed from overlapping planks, fastened with iron rivets, and designed to flex with the motion of the waves. Each ship was a blend of artistry, engineering, and intimate knowledge of watercraft, capable of carrying warriors, traders, families, and cargo alike across thousands of miles. The prows and sterns of Viking ships were often elaborately carved, adorned with dragons, serpents, or abstract designs. These carvings were not only decorative, they served to inspire courage, intimidate enemies, and protect those aboard through symbolic power. The aesthetic detail reflected a culture where function and beauty were inseparable, where artistry accompanied the practical demands of life at sea. Viking navigation was equally remarkable. Before the compass was widespread in Europe, the Norse relied on keen observation of the natural world, the sun, stars, tides, winds, cloud patterns, and the behavior of birds and sea mammals all provided guidance. Pilots and navigators memorized intricate knowledge of coastlines, currents, and seasonal conditions. They understood how the light on the water, the color of the sea, or the flight of gulls could reveal hidden land or treacherous shoals. This deep connection to nature allowed Vikings to travel with precision, even in unfamiliar waters. Instruments such as the sunstone, a crystal capable of polarizing light, were used to locate the sun on cloudy days, guiding direction even when the horizon was obscured. Skilled sailors also relied on experience, intuition, and shared knowledge passed through generations. The combination of observation, experimentation, and collective memory enabled voyages that were astonishing in both distance and accuracy. Viking ships came in various types, suited to different purposes. Longships, sleek and fast, were ideal for raiding, exploration, and warfare. Knarrs were broader, more robust vessels used for cargo, trade, and longer ocean voyages. Each type reflected a balance between speed, capacity, and durability, crafted with an understanding of purpose and environment. The ships were not static. They were living tools, maintained with care, adapted to seasonal changes, and repaired diligently to ensure safety and reliability. Imagine the crew aboard a longship, the rhythmic stroke of oars, the taut lines of the sail catching the wind, the creak of timber and rope, and the collective focus required for long hours at sea. Each person had a role, from steering and rowing to managing cargo, maintaining the vessel, and keeping watch. Life aboard ship was disciplined, yet communal, a microcosm of Viking society in motion, where skill, endurance, and cooperation were essential. Viking voyages could traverse vast distances, from the fjords of Norway to the rivers of Russia, the coasts of Britain and Ireland, the shores of France, Iceland, Greenland, and even the edges of North America. Each journey demanded preparation, foresight, and courage. The sea could be calm and inviting one day and treacherous the next. Storms, fog, ice, and unpredictable currents tested both ship and crew. Yet the Vikings' mastery of navigation and vessel design allowed them to survive and thrive where others might have failed. Beyond their practical uses, ships carried cultural and spiritual significance. Burial ships, often elaborate and laden with treasures, honored the dead and symbolized their journey into the afterlife. The ship itself was a vessel not only of travel but of passage, transition, and memory, embodying both the physical and metaphysical journey of the Viking soul. Even in distant colonies, from Greenland to Vinland, these ships remained the lifeblood of survival and connection. They enabled communication, trade, migration, and exploration, reinforcing the Viking ability to adapt and thrive in far-flung regions. The mastery of shipbuilding and navigation was a defining element of Norse culture, a testament to intelligence, observation, and human ingenuity. Imagine, dear friend, drifting with the Longship at sunset. The water glimmers gold, the sails ripple gently in the wind, and the soft rhythm of oars and waves creates a meditative cadence. Feel the connection to generations of sailors who ventured into the unknown, guided by stars, instincts, and an intimate understanding of the sea. Through these ships and their navigators, the Vikings carried not only themselves, but their culture, their stories, and their influence across continents. In exploring Viking ships and navigation, we see a people whose courage was matched by skill, whose curiosity was guided by observation, and whose art was intertwined with practicality. The longship is a symbol of Viking life, elegant, powerful, adaptive, and connected to both the world and the imagination. Now, dear friend, let us turn our attention to the women of Viking society, whose lives were filled with both quiet strength and remarkable influence, often overshadowed in stories of raids, voyages, and battles. Viking women played essential roles in shaping family, community, and culture. Imagine the warmth of a longhouse at dawn, the gentle light illuminating faces as women move through daily tasks with purpose, skill, and wisdom, ensuring both survival and continuity in a complex world. Women managed households with efficiency and foresight. In the absence of men on long voyages or raids, they oversaw farms, tended livestock, cultivated crops, and preserved food for winter. Their work was vital for the survival of communities, requiring physical strength, intelligence, and resilience. These responsibilities created a rhythm of daily life that balanced labor with care, discipline with creativity, and tradition with adaptation. Child rearing was another significant aspect of Viking women's lives. Mothers nurtured children, passing on practical skills, moral guidance, and cultural knowledge. From a young age, children observed and learned from their mothers, absorbing lessons about farming, crafting, household management, and social interaction. Storytelling, songs, and recitations of sagas often fell within the women's domain, making them custodians of oral tradition and cultural continuity. Craftsmanship was central to Viking women's roles. They spun wool, wove textiles, dyed fabrics, and produced clothing suited for both daily use and ceremonial occasions. They prepared leather, sewed garments, and created decorative items that reflected both aesthetic sensibility and social status. Jewelry, embroidery, and household objects often bore intricate designs, symbolizing identity, heritage, and personal or familial achievement. Through these crafts, women combined functionality with artistry, embedding cultural expression into the fabric of daily life. In addition to domestic and artistic responsibilities, Viking women could wield significant social and economic influence. Land ownership, management of estates, and participation in trade or negotiation were not uncommon, particularly in the absence of male relatives. Women could act as stewards, decision makers, and representatives of their families, demonstrating intelligence, authority, and resourcefulness in maintaining both prosperity and social stability, religion and ritual were also central to women's roles. They participated in ceremonies, observed seasonal festivals, and performed rituals to honor gods, spirits, and ancestors. In some cases, women served as priestesses, seers, or spiritual guides, interpreting omens, offering counsel, and maintaining sacred practices. Through these spiritual duties, they influenced both daily life and the broader moral and cultural framework of their communities. Marriage, family alliances, and inheritance were additional areas where women exercised influence through arranged marriages, negotiation of dowries, or management of family wealth. Women helped shape political and social networks. Their choices and actions could strengthen bonds between families, secure resources, or resolve disputes, reflecting a nuanced understanding of both personal and communal interests. Viking women also participated in travel and exploration. Some accompanied men on voyages, contributing to the establishment of colonies in Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland. These women adapted to harsh climates, helped build homes, manage supplies, and supported the survival of new settlements. Their presence was not only practical, but also vital for sustaining life, culture, and social cohesion in distant lands. Though the Viking world was often depicted as dominated by warriors and raids, women could also wield power in exceptional circumstances. Sagas tell of shield maidens, women who fought alongside men in battle, though their historical prevalence is debated. Even beyond direct combat, women could act decisively in defense, diplomacy, and governance, demonstrating courage, intelligence, and resilience. Imagine, dear friend, walking through a Viking settlement at morning. You see women tending animals, weaving cloth, and overseeing daily routines with quiet authority. Children play nearby, learning skills and stories. There is a rhythm to the day, a balance of labor, education, and care, infused with creativity, strategy, and wisdom. In every task, there is evidence of influence, resilience, and cultural continuity. Through their work, guidance, and participation in both domestic and public life, Viking women shaped society, preserving knowledge, sustaining communities, and contributing to the expansion and endurance of Norse culture. Their influence extended beyond households into trade, politics, and spirituality, leaving an enduring legacy that echoes through sagas, archaeology, and history. So tonight, as you relax into the gentle flow of thought, imagine the Viking women, strong, intelligent, and resourceful, moving gracefully through daily life, managing challenges with skill, and nurturing the next generation. In understanding their roles and influence, you glimpse the quiet yet profound strength that sustained Viking society, balancing courage and creativity, tradition and adaptability, shaping a culture as rich and resilient as the lands it spanned. Now, dear friend, let us drift gently through time, beyond the age of raiding and settlement, to trace the enduring echoes of the Vikings in the modern world. Though their longships have long since vanished and the roar of battle has quieted, the Vikings left marks that ripple across Europe and beyond, in language, law, trade, culture, and collective imagination. Imagine walking through a European city, perhaps on cobbled streets or along rivers, sensing the invisible threads of Viking influence woven subtly into everyday life. One of the most tangible legacies is found in language. Many English words, place names, and dialects trace their roots to Old Norse. Towns with names ending in by, meaning village or settlement, such as Derby or Whitby, reflect Viking colonization and habitation. Words like sky, window, knife, and even husband have Norse origins, quietly preserved in the rhythm of daily speech. The Vikings' linguistic influence reveals the depth of contact, trade, and integration that occurred over centuries. Legal traditions in parts of Europe also bear the imprint of Norse practices. The concept of local assemblies, or things-informed governance, justice, and community participation, the idea that communities could gather, deliberate, and enforce laws collectively, was a significant contribution to the evolution of local government. Even in places far from Scandinavia, echoes of these democratic and participatory practices can be traced through history, reflecting a Viking emphasis on communal responsibility and fairness. Trade and commerce evolved under Viking influence as well. Their networks connected Scandinavia with Britain, Ireland, France, Russia, and the Mediterranean. This facilitated not only the exchange of goods, but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Towns and cities that grew along Viking trade routes flourished, creating centers of economic activity and cultural exchange that shaped regional development for centuries. The Vikings' adaptability, mobility, and commercial acumen laid foundations for the interconnected European markets that continue to thrive today. Architecture and settlement patterns also bear Viking traces. In regions of northern Europe, settlements followed strategic patterns similar to those established by Norse colonists. Farms, towns, and defensive positions often reflect the practical and aesthetic principles carried from Scandinavia, emphasizing proximity to water, defensive advantage, and resource management. In some regions, archaeological remains of longhouses, fortifications, and harbor structures reveal the lasting imprint of Viking design and ingenuity. Art and cultural motifs provide another window into Viking influence. Intricate patterns, stylized animals, and symbolic designs appear in medieval art, church carvings, and decorative objects, demonstrating continuity and adaptation of Norse aesthetics. The sagas and stories preserved by the Vikings influenced literature and folklore throughout Europe, inspiring generations of storytellers, poets, and writers to explore themes of heroism, morality, and adventure. Viking influence is also evident in genetic and demographic patterns. Scandinavian settlers intermarried with local populations, contributing to the gene pool of regions across the British Isles, northern France, and parts of Russia. Archaeological and DNA studies reveal traces of Viking ancestry, offering a living connection between the past and present, a subtle reminder that history flows through the bodies and identities of people today. Even in governance and military organization, Norse practices shaped medieval Europe. The Vikings' emphasis on disciplined strategy, flexible leadership, and naval capability influenced local rulers, military tactics, and coastal defense systems. Their approach to exploration, colonization, and integration left lessons that were absorbed, adapted and transmitted across generations, creating a legacy that informed European expansion and exploration for centuries. Religion and myth also left lasting cultural imprints. While Christianity eventually replaced Norse paganism, many stories, festivals, and symbolic motifs persisted, blending into local folklore and religious practice. Concepts of heroism, fate, and morality derived from Norse myths subtly influenced medieval literature, moral instruction, and artistic expression, embedding Viking perspectives within broader European culture. In modern imagination, the Viking legacy is both romanticized and respected. Their stories of adventure, courage, and resilience continue to inspire books, films, art, and scholarship. Yet beyond these popular images lies a deeper, quieter influence, the practical, cultural, and social innovations that shaped the world long after the last longship sailed into the horizon. The Vikings' ability to explore, adapt, and integrate left lessons in resilience, ingenuity, and cultural synthesis that continue to resonate today. Imagine, dear friend, walking through the streets of York or Dublin, tracing the invisible pathways of Viking settlers. Picture longhouses replaced by modern homes, but still oriented near rivers and resources. Hear words that echo Old Norse origins. Sense the rhythms of trade and community shaped by centuries of interaction, and feel the enduring pulse of a culture that once traversed oceans, rivers, and forests to leave its mark. The Viking legacy is subtle yet pervasive, a whisper through time that connects past and present, reminding us of the ingenuity, courage, and curiosity of a remarkable people. So tonight, as you relax and drift deeper into thought, imagine the invisible threads of Viking influence woven through Europe and beyond. Language, law, trade, art, settlement patterns, and stories all carry traces of their journeys, ingenuity, and resilience. In understanding the Viking legacy, you glimpse not only a past of adventure and challenge, but a continuum of influence that shapes our modern world quietly, elegantly, and enduringly. Now, dear friend, let us drift across the cold Atlantic once more, guided by the quiet courage and curiosity of the Viking explorers, to a land far west of Greenland, a place they called Vinland. Imagine the horizon stretching endlessly, the waves lapping softly against the hull of a longship, and the wind carrying the scent of both salt and possibility. Vinland represents the farthest reach of Viking exploration, a place where bravery, skill, and wonder converged to create one of the earliest known European contacts with North America. The journey to Vinland began with careful observation, navigation, and preparation. Explorers such as Leif Erikson and others followed the westward routes first tested by the Greenlandic colonies, guided by knowledge of currents, wind patterns, and the behavior of birds and marine life. These voyages were perilous, requiring vigilance, endurance, and a deep understanding of both ships and nature. Each crossing was a testament to the Vikings' mastery of the seas, their courage in the face of uncertainty, and their desire to discover new horizons. Vinland was described in the sagas as a land of abundant resources, with fertile soil, plentiful timber, and rivers rich with fish. The name itself evokes the promise of vines, or fertile lands, though historians debate whether grapes were actually present. Regardless, Vinland represented opportunity, a place where the Vikings could supplement the harsher environments of Greenland and Iceland with new lands capable of sustaining crops, livestock, and settlements. Upon arrival, the explorers observed, surveyed, and mapped the coastline. They identified suitable areas for temporary camps, freshwater sources, and locations where resources could be harvested. Life in Vinland was a blend of careful planning and adaptation. While exploration required mobility and alertness, settlers also engaged in farming, hunting, and fishing, ensuring that the land could support human life even in a distant and unfamiliar setting. Interactions with the indigenous peoples of Vinland are recorded with both curiosity and caution. The sagas describe encounters with the Skrælings, the native inhabitants, reflecting moments of trade, negotiation, and conflict. These encounters required diplomacy, observation, and sometimes restraint, as the Vikings navigated a delicate balance between curiosity, survival, and respect for the unknown. Each interaction was an opportunity to learn, adapt, and understand a land and culture far from their own. Life in Vinland was challenging, as the climate, terrain, and isolation tested the settlers' resilience. Harsh winters, unpredictable weather, and distance from Greenland made self-sufficiency critical. The Vikings relied on both traditional skills and innovative strategies to survive, combining farming, hunting, and the careful use of natural resources with knowledge carried from their Scandinavian homelands. Community and cooperation were essential, as every individual contributed to the survival and success of the group. The voyages to Vinland also reflect the Vikings' curiosity and desire for knowledge. They recorded observations about new lands, flora, and fauna, expanding their understanding of the world beyond the familiar North Atlantic. These explorations demonstrated not only courage, but also the Vikings' scientific and observational skills, as they documented coastlines, landmarks, and resources for future generations. While permanent settlements in Vinland were limited and ultimately abandoned, the legacy of these voyages is profound. They reveal the Vikings as pioneers, capable of crossing vast oceans and encountering entirely new worlds. Vinland stands as a symbol of exploration, adaptability, and the human desire to reach beyond known horizons, even in the face of uncertainty and danger. Imagine, dear friend, standing on the shores of Vinland at dusk. The sun dips low, casting golden light across forests and rivers. The air is filled with the scents of pine, earth, and fresh water. You hear the gentle crash of waves and the distant calls of birds. Explorers and settlers move about, gathering resources, tending fires, and observing the land with careful eyes. In this quiet moment, the spirit of discovery is palpable, a bridge between worlds and centuries. Through Vinland, we understand the Vikings' courage, ingenuity, and insatiable curiosity. They were more than raiders or traders. They were explorers and settlers, shaping new worlds while maintaining connections to their homes across the ocean. Their ventures into North America predate many later European expeditions, leaving a remarkable legacy of exploration, resilience, and engagement with the unknown. So tonight, as you settle into the gentle rhythm of thought, imagine the Longships gliding across the Atlantic, the explorers stepping onto new shores, and the quiet determination that carried them to Vinland. In understanding this chapter of Viking history, you glimpse the adventurous spirit that drove them to the edge of the known world, illuminating the vastness of their courage, curiosity, and human ingenuity. Now, dear friend, let us drift slowly into the final chapter of the Viking Age, a period when the fierce raiders, explorers, and settlers of Scandinavia gradually became part of the fabric of medieval Europe. Imagine the northern seas calm, longships moored along fjords, and the echo of distant battles fading into memory. The Viking world transformed, not in a sudden collapse, but through gradual adaptation, integration, and the blending of cultures, a quiet, continuous evolution that shaped Europe in ways both visible and subtle. The decline of Viking raiding was influenced by several factors. European kingdoms became more organized, building stronger defenses, fortifications, and armies capable of repelling attacks. Coastal regions developed naval capabilities, watchtowers, and rapid communication systems, reducing the element of surprise that had made Viking raids so effective. As opposition grew, raiding became riskier, less profitable, and increasingly strategic, requiring adaptation rather than brute force. At the same time, internal changes in Viking society contributed to the shift. As Scandinavian kingdoms centralized, chieftains and kings focused on governance, trade, and territorial expansion rather than constant raiding. Laws, taxation, and administrative structures became more sophisticated, encouraging stability and reducing the appeal of unpredictable ventures abroad. Viking leaders increasingly sought wealth, power, and influence through diplomacy, commerce, and integration, rather than solely through plunder. Christianization played a pivotal role in transforming Viking identity and society. Missionaries, trade connections, and political alliances introduced the new faith gradually, reshaping cultural values, rituals, and moral frameworks. Churches were established, literacy spread, and European norms were absorbed, while old beliefs persisted in folklore, sagas, and art. The adoption of Christianity created a shared framework that connected Scandinavia more closely with the rest of Europe, facilitating trade, diplomacy, and political integration. Vikings also transitioned from raiders to settlers and merchants. Their extensive networks, forged through centuries of exploration and trade, became avenues for commerce rather than conquest. Towns and cities flourished along former raiding routes, evolving into centers of economic, cultural, and political activity. Former Viking leaders sometimes became European nobles, integrating into local hierarchies while maintaining ties to their Scandinavian heritage. This blending of identities was gradual, a synthesis of Norse traditions with emerging medieval European structures. Intermarriage and cultural exchange further facilitated integration. Scandinavian settlers married into local populations, creating bonds of kinship that strengthened political and social alliances. Norse customs, language, and artistic motifs merged with local traditions, influencing architecture, crafts, and governance. Over generations, these interactions created hybrid cultures that carried the legacy of Viking skill, resilience, and adaptability into the evolving European world. Even as their raiding days ended, Vikings continued to influence military, political, and economic life. Their expertise in shipbuilding, navigation, and strategic thinking informed local naval practices and exploration. Their understanding of trade networks, resource management, and diplomacy contributed to the prosperity of emerging European states. In essence, the Vikings' legacy shifted from overt conquest to enduring influence, quietly shaping the trajectory of medieval Europe. The integration of Vikings was also reflected in historical memory and literature. Chronicles, sagas, and legal texts began to document both the violent past and the evolving role of Norse settlers. Heroes and legends were remembered, not only for their exploits abroad, but also for their contributions to community, governance, and cultural enrichment. In this way, history, myth, and reality intertwined, preserving a nuanced record of Viking impact. Imagine, dear friend, walking through a Scandinavian town in the late 11th century. Longships rest in calm waters, farms and workshops hum with activity, and churches rise alongside traditional longhouses. Children play in the streets, learning skills from both local and Norse elders. Merchants trade goods from across Europe, and stories of gods, heroes, and distant voyages are still told by firesides. The Vikings are no longer only raiders. They are citizens, artisans, merchants, and leaders, fully woven into the tapestry of medieval Europe. Through gradual decline, adaptation, and integration, the Viking Age came to a close, leaving a legacy that continued to resonate. Their courage, ingenuity, and resilience were not lost. They transformed into cultural, economic, and political influence that shaped Europe's development. The skills, stories, and values of the Vikings persisted, carried forward through generations, influencing governance, exploration, art, and social structures. So tonight, as you drift into the quiet embrace of thought, imagine the Viking world evolving, longships giving way to towns, warriors becoming leaders, and raiders becoming integrated members of a larger European community. The end of the Viking Age is not a sudden stop, but a gentle transformation, a blending of courage, skill, and culture that continues to echo in the rhythms of history, leaving the world richer, wiser, and quietly infused with the spirit of the Vikings. Now, with a smile on your face, you will have a good understanding of the Vikings and a good night's sleep. Goodbye, dear friend. See you next time.